Just before we get started, some of you might know that I have another channel called Mega Projects, which is all about mega projects. If you don't know about that, please do subscribe to it. Well, by popular demand, I wanted to cover some things on that channel that weren't quite mega enough for it, so I present to you a brand new channel, Side Projects, covers stuff like secret Soviet space weapons, World War II's greatest airplanes, histories, lost treasures, and the movement of London Bridge from London to a random town in America, stuff like that. New videos every week, so if you were thinking, boy, Simon doesn't make enough content for me, well, good news for you. Subscribe to that channel, there is a link below. And let's get into it. How often do we get to quote pirate folk music on this channel? Not often! That is why, to introduce today's destination, I will borrow some lyrics from the song Welcome to Tortuga by the band, the Banished Privateers. The island of Tortuga was a place to make a fortune on expense of those less fortunate, a place to lose your savings in a single night, a place for new beginnings, a place of filth and self-made men. In the 17th century, the island of Tortuga in the Caribbean Sea became the main base of operations for the dreaded Buccaneers, sea-roving, swashbuckling scoundrels and scallywags like Henry Morgan or Roche the Brazilian. They plundered merchant ships and terrorized coastal towns before returning to their safe haven, where 1,600 harlots can help a mate unwind, and 40-odd taverns can quench your heavy thirst each night. Please beware, we are talking piracy today, so there's plenty of violence and plenty of torture involved. Suitably, this video will be rated R. Oh God, that's bad. The island of Tortuga, or Isle de la Torte, or Turtle Islands, lies some 15 kilometers north of Hispaniola, the largest Caribbean island where Haiti and Santo Domingo are located. From the 1630s onwards, the islands became the main base of operations for the legendary Buccaneers, a type of pirate originating in this area of the Caribbean. But before we meet these gentlemen, let's take a look at their island home. Tortuga measures only 37 kilometers in length and covers a surface area of 179 square kilometers. Its shape is reminiscent of a turtle, hence its name. According to some sources, it was Christopher Columbus himself who christened the island during his first voyage to what he believed to be India. To describe how Tortuga looked like in the 17th century and who were its dwellers, we have a star witness, Monsieur Alexandre Exquemelin. He was a barber surgeon of uncertain origin, French, Dutch, or Flemish, who migrated to the Caribbean in the employment of the French West India Company. Alexander spent some time working as an indentured servant in the colony of Saint Dominique, a French settlement occupying the eastern half of Hispaniola. He eventually escaped this miserable life and joined a buccaneer crew in 1666. He finally retired from piracy in 1674, returning to Europe. Exquemelin recorded his experience in the book The Buccaneers of America, which popularized the deeds of pirates in Europe. The terrain of Tortuga was, and still is, rugged and mountainous, with rocky coasts. These features made of the island a prized possession, as it made a natural shelter for raiding parties at sea. The northern coast of Tortuga was particularly impervious and inaccessible, and Exquemelin noted how it was virtually uninhabited. The southern coast instead allowed for the construction of a good-sized port town called Cayenne or Cayona. The port was able to harbour a great number of vessels, including large ships of 70 guns. Cayenne was home to the richest landowners of the island and offered a number of wholesome recreational activities to sailors on shore leave: taverns, gambling dens, and brothels, of course. Exquemelin was also very interested in the local flora. In his book, he described the presence of a plant called guaiacum, or lignum sanctum, holy wood in English. Its virtues are very well known, especially to those who observe not the seventh commandment and are given to impure copulations. Guaiacum was, in fact, an antidote against venereal disease, clearly rife amongst canoodling buccaneers. And who or what were those buccaneers? This term is often used interchangeably with the likes of pirate and privateer. In truth, there are some nuances. Pirates are essentially armed robbers at sea who target ships or coastal towns. Privateers were pirates, but acting on behalf of sovereign governments. With a letter of marque in their pockets, privateers were authorized and encouraged to attack enemy ships. The government issuing such letters could receive a percentage of the loot or buy it wholesale in exchange for hard cash. The term buccaneer specifically identifies the wealthy communities of French, English, Welsh, and Dutch pirates who operated off the coasts of Tortuga, but also Hispaniola and Jamaica. They acted mainly as privateers on France's paybook, targeting Spanish vessels and colonial settlements. The first communities of buccaneers formed in the 1610s on the northern coast of Hispaniola. The island acted as a magnet for these early brothers of the coast. They were shipwreck survivors, deserters, members of Protestant sects running away from the wars of religion in Europe. Many more were indentured servants who had escaped from the chains and lashes of the tobacco plantations. These early groups took to hunting to sustain themselves. Hispaniola was rife with wild boars and wild cattle, which they slew, skinned, and then smoked inside small huts called Buccaneers, hence their name. The early buccaneers were hunters and traders who sold their surplus meat to passing ships. They had some peculiar and well-defined habits and laws, though, called the custom of the coast, which emphasized a sense of community, cooperation, and loyalty. For example, during hunting trips, a buccaneer could eat only after the party had killed as many animals as there were hunters. Buccaneers also practiced a form of partnership known as Matelotage. This was a sort of common law homosexual marriage, which bound two companions for life and even beyond. By the terms of the bond, whoever died first would leave his goods to the other. A modern interpretation of Matelotage considers it a form of insurance policy rather than an early institution of gay marriage. However, homosexual relationships were quite common among buccaneers, sailors, and colonists in general in the Caribbean. As the buccaneers grew in number, their prey dwindled. With fewer cattle or boars to hunt, the buccaneers took to another target. The first recorded buccaneer to change a sector of business was Pierre le Grand, Pierre the Great. With a crew of furious companions dressed in shirts smeared with blood, Pierre was the first to plunder a passing ship, filling his pockets with plenty of booty. Following his example, many more buccaneers took to piracy, and as these scoundrels were mainly Dutch, English, and French, they decided to target their shared enemy, the masters of the Caribbean and much of the Americas, the Spanish Empire. The early acts of piracy committed by the former hunters were crude but effective. The buccaneers crowded as many men as possible into large dugout canoes, armed to the teeth with pistols, muskets, and cutlasses. They were very good shots who prided themselves on being able to shoot spinning coins in mid-air. They boldly attacked larger ships armed with cannons, which did not scare them in the least. Their tactical rule of thumb was that 4 muskets did as much damage as a large gun. The buccaneers also had other weapons in their arsenals: hunger and cruelty. By overcrowding their own vessels, they were guaranteed to grow hungry during long expeditions, and a hungry man fights more ferociously. The feeling of hatred toward the Spanish was mutual, and the Spanish launched several expeditions to disperse the buccaneers. These attacks succeeded in driving them away from Hispaniola, but eventually they would reassemble in Tortuga. The first formal colony on the island was established in 1625. French and English settlers from the island of St. Kitts had aimed to relocate to Hispaniola, but the island was home to too many Spanish settlers for their taste, so they wisely aimed for the smaller Tortuga. Some sources contradict one another, but it appears that it was French settlers who founded Cayenne, or perhaps simply expanded a pre-existing market town. This had been set up by a splinter group of buccaneers from Hispaniola looking for clients for their meat and cattle hides. Neither the French and English were safe from enemy attacks. In 1629, a Spanish raid expelled the colonists from Tortuga, but the Spanish in the Caribbean suffered from a chronic problem: too many territories to defend and too few men. Moreover, those men were not the skilled deadly tercios spilling blood and widows' tears in Europe. The colonial soldiers were mainly irregular militias, poorly trained and badly armed. Hence, after this victory, the commander, Don Frederic de Toledo, had to redeploy his troops elsewhere. An Anglo-French expedition returned to the island in 1630. It was now that the buccaneers started pouring into Cayenne, looking for a safe base of operation to harass the Spaniards. Spanish sailors and troops were occasionally able to stage large surprise attacks. In fact, they returned on 2 different occasions, in 1634 and 1638. Both times they drove away colonists and buccaneers alike. But they always returned when the Spanish had to redeploy somewhere else. After the last attack, Tortuga's colonists came mainly from France. The buccaneers were now a mixed bunch, mainly French, but also Dutch, English, and Welsh. The regular non-robbing, non-murdering colonists on the island sent a request for reinforcements and protection to the colony of St. Christophe, now St. Kitts. In 1642, their plea was heard, and they were gifted with their own brand new governor, Jean Levasseur. He was an able leader, a good military commander, and most of all, a skilled engineer. It was he who built the fort protecting the harbour, armed with 40 cannons. It was he who formalized the practice of issuing letters of marque to the buccaneers. This is when the hunters turned sea rovers became fully fledged privateers, a sort of mercenary navy and amphibious force serving the French crown. This is also the beginning of the heyday of the Tortugan Buccaneers. The once motley crew strengthened their bonds of mutual support and began calling themselves the Brethren of the Coast. With the backing of the governor and with access to hard cash in exchange for booty, the Buccaneers began perfecting their military prowess. Popular images may depict them as a ragtag ensemble of criminals, but they were often better equipped and better trained than their enemies. A Buccaneer captain would normally issue a recruitment call before an expedition. Each recruit had to bring his own set of weapons and enough gunpowder and ammunition. The next concern was logistics, especially food, mainly pork and salted tortoise. Tortoise could be fished directly, while the swine was stolen from Spanish farmers. Once the vessel was fully stocked, the crew negotiated their salary, which was then formalized in a contract. The carpenter and the surgeon received a fixed salary between 100 and 250 pieces of 8 or Spanish silver dollars. The captain, officers, and crew received a share of their ill-gotten booty. The captain's share was usually 5 to 6 times higher than one of the average sailors, but the contracts were such that everybody, including the youngest of the recruits, would get a fair share. The contracts also featured an insurance policy or compensation to be given in the case of severe wounds. The typical rates were 600 pieces of 8 for the loss of a right arm, 500 for the left arm or right leg. A left leg was worth 400 pieces, while a single finger or an eye was valued at 100. If there wasn't enough cash to cover such indemnities, a mutilated buccaneer could be paid in slaves instead. Normally, one slave was equivalent to 100 Spanish dollars. With all the paperwork in place, a buccaneering ship sailed the seas between Yucatan, Hispaniola, and Cuba, looking to intercept Spanish merchant vessels. Compared to the very early raids, buccaneers from the 1640s onwards could count on large sailing ships armed with up to 28 guns. However, they would always tow at least a pinnace and several canoes. These smaller boats allowed them to launch silent, surprise attacks on coastal towns and forts, or even take on much larger, better-armed Spanish vessels. A favorite tactic was to approach a large ship by using 2 or more smaller crafts disguised as fishing boats. One would sail to the stern of the Spanish ship and immobilize its rudder. Next, the buccaneers on the other craft would deliver volleys of musket fire targeting the helmsman and other sailors. This dual attack suppressed any chance to maneuver the ship. The final move was to jump on board, cutlasses drawn, to eliminate any resistance and capture the ship. As profitable as this activity was, Tortugan commanders began changing their strategy in the 1650s and 1660s. They preferred to attack coastal settlements, as the booty was much larger. During this same period, the Buccaneers' ranks swelled with veterans from the 30 Years' War, which had devastated the continent from 1618 to 1648. Legendary Welsh buccaneer Captain Henry Morgan recruited many of these soldiers, who trained as men in infantry tactics. As a result, Spanish colonial towns and forts had to contend with large, well-trained contingents fighting in formation, with flags flying, drums beating, and all of that stuff. The buccaneer infantry normally advanced in close ranks, with each man carrying at least 2 firearms. When they got in range of the enemy, they delivered devastating volleys. Once all their firearms had been discharged, the buccaneers attacked at close range with swords and knives drawn. Some crews were even equipped with rudimentary hand grenades. These were used with great effect by psychopathic buccaneer commander François l'Aulnay in his expedition to Nicaragua in 1668. This savage fighter is singled out by Exquemelin as the cruelest among the buccaneers due to his knack for torture. But it must be said that inflicting pain on prisoners was a common practice amongst the residents of Tortuga. How else would they find out about hidden stashes of gold? Common methods of interrogation included the strappato, hang your prisoner by his wrist and hoist him up off the ground, then tug on the rope until his shoulders dislocate, punch and stab at will if necessary. Walding, twist a rope around some poor sod's forehead and see his eyes pop out. Roasting, the clue is in the name, literally roast the prisoner on a red-hot stone. Slicing, the arrogant Spanish captain does not reveal where his gold is, then slice body parts from him, slowly and one at a time. No rush, it does wonders for the memory. And finally, eat your heart out, which fortunately was not really a thing and luckily happened just once. This was when l'Aulnay ripped the heart from a live Spanish prisoner and chomped on it. Later, he shoved the organ into another prisoner's face and forced him to eat it too. The actions of the Tortugan brethren dealt a massive blow to the Spanish Empire. According to conservative estimates, the Buccaneers sacked 18 cities, 4 towns, and 35 villages. Their loot from land and sea attacks totaled about 60 million Spanish golden escudos. Each escudo was about 6.87 grams in gold. That many gold coins at today's market value would be approximately $25 billion. Most of that money was squandered at the taverns and brothels of Tortuga. The recreational trade on the island and in the port town of Cayenne was sponsored by the governors, especially Levasseur. In a move to suppress the institution of Matelotage, the governor imported several hundred prostitutes to Tortuga. The establishment of brothels naturally sprouted all sorts of parallel drinking establishments and gambling dens. Exquemelin tells us how the Buccaneers drank brandy and wine like it was water. A common pastime was to buy a whole cask of wine, broach it, and drink it until there's not a drop left. A buccaneer could generously offer a drink to a passerby. If he refused, he would be challenged to a punch-up or even a knife fight. Refusing a free drink was quite the capital offense, considering how the high demand for liquor had inflated the prices. Exquemelin even suggests that it was the high cost of entertainment which motivated the Buccaneers into launching more and more daring expeditions. The tavern keepers got part of their money, and the whores took the rest. So once more, the Buccaneers had to consider ways of obtaining more money. The Spaniards in the Americas were not mere punching bags for the Buccaneers, and very often they fought back effectively. In February of 1654, for example, 700 Spanish troops landed in Cayenne, took the fort, and expelled the Buccaneer garrison. In August, they successfully repelled a counter-invasion, so, well, go Spain. But guess what? The Spanish soldiers were eventually redeployed elsewhere. Nobody expects the Spanish relocation. In 1655, Tortuga was settled by an English expedition led by one Elias Watts and his son-in-law, Colonel Arundel. The English colony employed again the services of the Buccaneers to strike at the Spaniards in Hispaniola. 4 years later, control returned to French hands in a strange affair which sounds like a con. A French gentleman, Jeremy Deschamps, had managed to receive a commission by the English Commonwealth under Richard Cromwell to act as a governor in Tortuga. In 1660, he landed in Cayenne, and as his credentials seemed legit, Watts relocated to New England. Deschamps then revealed his plans. He was, in fact, taking possession of the island on behalf of the French crown. Failing to receive orders from the restored King Charles II, Colonel Arundel failed to act immediately. He tried to arrest Deschamps' deputy, but he was apprehended himself by the French and deported to Jamaica. So the French were again in charge, and the Buccaneers were yet again in their pockets. Over the following decade, Buccaneers were involved not only in raids against the Spanish, but also in a sort of undeclared war with the English colonists in Jamaica, colonists who themselves hired Buccaneers for their purposes. Nonetheless, national distinctions meant little to the sea rovers. The Brethren of the Coast signed to different powers. In fact, they took to the habit of meeting in secret in Isle de la Vaca, Cow Island. Conveniently located halfway between Tortuga and Jamaica, this was the perfect base to plan joint raids against merchant ships. The late 1660s and early 1670s were arguably the golden age of buccaneering, with characters like Henry Morgan, Francois l'Olonnais, and Captain Guy spreading terror across the Caribbean, but their stories belong on our sister channel, Biographics. In the late 17th century, the Spanish colonies were finally reinforced by better armed, better trained troops. This prompted many buccaneers to look for less risky endeavors, such as logging. But what really put an end to the Brethren of the Coast was a shift in relations amongst European powers. England and Spain, for example, had been at war for much of the century, but the Treaty of Madrid in 1670 put an end to hostilities. This left the Jamaican buccaneers without the letters of commission from the English crown. Many English rovers switched sides, seeking letters of marque from the French, but a 1677 law forbade English buccaneers from serving under the French. In 1683, buccaneering was declared illegal altogether. In 1688, England and Spain joined forces in the Grand Alliance alongside the Dutch Republic and other nations. Together, they waged the 9 Years' War against France. During this conflict, what remained of the Brethren of the Coast in Tortuga continued to serve King Louis XIV, acting as the de facto French navy in the Americas. However, the Peace of Ryswick put an end to hostilities in 1697, and consequently, the Buccaneers were left without steady employment from the governors in Cayenne. Moreover, following the peace, King Louis dispatched an official French fleet to the Caribbean. This effectively killed any prospect of a future commission from the French crown. Gradually, the old Brethren disbanded. It seems that crime and mercenary activities follow the same rules of supply and demand, just like any other trade. Some buccaneers turned to legitimate employment, but many more became pure pirates, serving no masters but themselves. Moving out of Tortuga, they relocated to the Bahamas or even as far away as Madagascar. Here, the descendants of the Brethren founded another pirate haven in the island of Sainte Marie, also known as Nosy Boraha. This became home to the famous cemetery of the pirates. This is, of course, another yarn for another time, one that we may spin if you ask kindly enough in the comments below. And I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching.